Hello everyone. So for today's video, I am going to share my knowledge and learnings about the subject biology genetics, and this is my presentation. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Felyun Magpayo, BS Ed Science major student, second year. So let's start. So there are 3 units in uh, this video. First is Unit 1, Genetics, the Science of Heredity and Variation. So, what is genetics? It is a scientific study of genes and heredity, of how certain qualities of traits and pass from parents to offspring as a result of change in DNA sequence. A gene is a segment of DNA that contains instruction for building one or more molecules that help the body work. Second is heredity. Refers to specific mechanism by which characteristic of traits and pass from one generation to the next by gene. So genes encode the information for making specific proteins which are responsible for specific traits of an individual. So, let's learn about the brief history of genetics. This unit 1, we have 3 learning outcomes. First is learn about the brief history of genetics. Second is illustrate the different scope of genetics. Third is describe how genetic is applied, its application in our daily life. So let's start with this. So, Gregor Mendel, through his work on Apea plants, discovered the fundamental law of inheritance. By the way, he is the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel discovered the basic principles of genetics in 1966. So, genetics is the study of how living things receive common traits from previous generation. So, these traits are described by genetic information carried by a molecule called DNA. So, uh, who is Gregor Mendel or Johann? Johann Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. So, the study of third is the scope of genetics. The study of mode of gene transmission from generation to generation is broadly called transmission genetics. So, genetic may be conveniently divided into 3 areas of study, which is transmission genetics, molecular genetics, and population genetics rather. So, the third is application of genetics in our life. So, how genetic importance in our life, or how can genetic help us? So, first, in medicine, genetic technique can use in medicine to diagnose and treat inherent human disorder. Knowledge of the family history of conditions such as cancer or various disorder may indicate a hereditary tendency to develop this. So, understanding genetic factors and genetic disorder is important in learning some or promoting health and preventing disease. So, it is very important. Some genetic changes had been associated with an increased risk of having a child with a birth defect or developmental disability or developing disease such as cancer or heart disease. So, Unit 2. So, the Unit 2 talks about the chromosomes or the basis of heredity and variation. So this Unit 2, the learning outcomes is explain and describe the chromosomal behavior during cell division. So this is the So, biologists have traditionally classified all living things into two major groups, the prokaryotic and eukaryotic. So, first, uh, eukaryotic. Eukaryotic is any cell of organism that possesses a clearly defined nucleus. The eukaryotic cell has a nuclear membrane that surrounds the nucleus, in which the well-defined chromosomes are located. So, eukaryotic cells are larger than prokaryotic cells and have a true nucleus. So, membrane-bound organelles and round-shaped chromosomes, the nucleus house the cell's DNA and direct the synthesis of proteins and ribosomes. So, organisms such as animals, plants, fungi, and protists are examples of eukaryotic. So, their cells are organized into compartmentalized structure called organelles, such as nucleus. So the ability to maintain different environment inside a single cells allow eukaryotic cells to carry out complex metabolic reaction that prokaryotic cannot. In fact, it is a big part of the reason why prokaryotic cell can group to many times larger than prokaryotic. So, what is prokaryotic cells? Prokaryotic cells comprise bacteria and archaea. Their genetic materials isn't stored within a membrane-bound nucleus. Instead, it is stored in nucleus that flows in the cell's cytoplasm. So, what is the characteristic of prokaryotics? So, prokaryotic cells are much smaller than eukaryotic cells, have no nucleus, and lack of organelles. All prokaryotic cells are encased by a cell wall. So, prokaryotics, what is the main function or what is the function of prokaryotic? So, prokaryotics have a cell membrane or a plasma membrane that acts like a protection cover. Prokaryotic cells have ribosomes, which are molecules that make proteins, their genetic materials in the nucleus, which is the region where DNA lies. So this is the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. We can show in this picture that eukaryotic is larger than prokaryotic, and it has many parts or this. So we're going to Unit 3. So the Unit 3 talk about gene segregation and integration. So this is the definition of terms of Unit 3. Heterozygous is a state of having inherit different forms of particular genes from each one or biological parents. Now, by different forms, we generally mean that there are different portions of genes where the sequence is different. So, what is homozygous? Homozygous describe the genetic condition or the genetic state where an individual has inherit the same DNA sequence for particular gene from both their biological mother or their biological father. So what is domain and recessive traits? Because it is common when we talk about genes, or when we talk about heterozygous, homozygous. So when a trait has two different form at the gene level, the trait that first appear or invisible expressed in organism is called the dominant trait. So example of dominant trait is a dominant trait is when an allele of a gene, an allele of a gene is said to be dominant when it effectively overrules the other allele. The eye color and the blood groups are both examples of dominant recessive gene relationship. So, alleles can be considered dominant or recessive. So, when dominant being the trait that is observed or shown and recessive being the trait is not seen, dominant allele are seen as the uppercase of a letter. For example, B, it is a recessive allele are seen as the lowercase of a letter B. So, dominant is the upper case of a letter, and the recessive is the lower case of the letter, with letter B small or letter B big. Or that's what I mean. So genotypes refers to the genetic makeup of our organism. In other words, it describes an organism complete set of genes. In a more narrow sense, the term can be used to refer to the alleles or variant forms of a gene that carried by the organism. So there are two types of what we call that, a genotype and phenotype. So let's see what is genotype and phenotype. So a gene include eye color. In this example, the allele is either brown or blue, with one inherit from mother and the other inherit from father. The brown allele is dominant and the blue allele is the recessive. This letter B. So the phenotype simple refers to an observable trait, or pheno simple means observe and comes from same root as the word phenomenon, and so it's an observable type of our organism, and it can refer to anything from common trait such as height, hair color, to presence or absence of a disease. So in human, phenotype example includes airwax type, height, blood type, eye color, hair color. The phenotypes aren't just physical traits. Behavior is also considered as phenotype. An example of inherent behavior is, so this is the illustration about the phenotype versus genotype. So when you say genotype is an organism genetic information. Homozygous, dominant, whereas BB uppercase. Then the phenotype purple, this is the observable traits that we can see. For example, he have a blue eyes, brown hair, that. So thank you for watching. This is my presentation about genetics, and it is very difficult. Biology is one of my favorite subjects when I was in junior high, and I want to learn more. And when I take up this course, I expected that I can learn more about genetics. And I'm so grateful and I'm so happy when our instructor is sending biology module, which is very interesting. So I want to become an effective biology teacher, which I can teach uh, my student about the learnings about this matter, because it is important, and it is very important that we know about things. So I hope you will learn from it, and that's all. Thank you. Stay safe and God bless.